Hey there, I'm Nicole Wilbur. I'm your writer and a story nerd, and welcome back to my channel. So today, because Preptober is coming very, very soon, it's right around the corner, I thought it would be fun to talk about my favorite outlining tips. I'm calling them like the 5 outlining tips that saved my novel, more like the tips that when I remember them, I calm down. Just a reminder, I'm not an expert. I just sort of say what works for me and hope that it might help you too. So let's dive right into it. Tip number 1, or the thing that I try to remember and tell myself when I'm starting a new book, is outlining should never be my first step. There are a lot of things I feel, for me, for my books, that are needed before I say scene 1, scene 2, scene 3. Everything from understanding the world to developing the characters, working out the arc, working out who is going to be here, what kind of personalities do they have, what kind of conflicts might I have, to the thread of the story. If it's a crime story, for me, I need to know like who the murderer is and what are some of the clues we're going to need. Where is that going to end? For a heist, what are they stealing? Why are they stealing it? How is it being pulled off? Most important, really, for me, is developing the characters. So I've started doing a lot of character work. I do Story Genius, writing a bunch of sort of turning point backstory scenes, working on the backstory, working on who they are, figuring out their Enneagram, all of that. And then once I feel like I know enough about the characters and I know enough about the story I want to tell, then I go on to outlining. So outlining, I think, for anybody, this is more planning, pre-writing. I talk about this video a lot because I absolutely love it. Michelle Schusterman has a great video about how she plans her multi-POV novels that I'm going to link right here. Again, that isn't outlining. That's just kind of planning and story work. All of that story work comes first before you start doing the scene-by-scene outline. Or at least before I do. Tip number 2 is I don't outline the whole novel at once. It is very, very intimidating to say, okay, I feel like I'm at a good place in my story work. Let me sit down. Here's scene 1, 2, 3, and just list them all. It doesn't really work for me. Some people will suggest, brainstorming your scenes, putting them on note cards, moving them around, seeing how they fit, and that's useful. What I like to do, though, is I learned this from Brandon Sanderson's outlining video. I'll link to my video about his video as well here. I like to do, I call it goal-oriented threading. So, for example, a novel has quite a few threads. Say we're in the adventure genre here, and one thread is to get the MacGuffin, whatever the MacGuffin is. And if you're not familiar with MacGuffin is like that object that the antagonist and the characters both want. So in Indiana Jones, it's the Ark. In Harry Potter, it's maybe the Elder Wand. I don't know. There are actually a lot of MacGuffins in there. The Philosopher's Stone, let's say. The Philosopher's Stone in Harry Potter, the Philosopher's Stone was the MacGuffin. So say one thread is steal the MacGuffin. Another thread is an information plot. So like a mystery. For example, in Harry Potter, it's who is trying to steal this MacGuffin. It could also be revealing someone's backstory or revealing, leading up to the plot twist. So plot twist I think of as being part of an information plot. And then when that information is revealed, that's the twist. So that could be another thread. A third thread could be your main character's development, your main character's arc. And the fourth thread could be your character's relationship and their love interest or something. And so what I like to do is I like to go thread by thread and say, okay, these are all of the steps that they have to take to steal the MacGuffin. These are all of the clues that need to be dropped for the information plot. These are all of the moments that have to happen for the character development thread. So, for example, we need to show the characters, let's say, flaw their misbelief. We need to show that really acting out in some of the earlier scenes. We need to show them doubling down on it. They need to have a realization moment. They need to have a moment where they prove in some sort of action that they've learned the lesson. So that would be a whole thread that I list out just in bullet notes. Once I have all of those threads, I start weaving them together. So the thread lists are quite long. The fun thing is that many of these threads can be woven into a couple of scenes. For example, you could have the relationship develop, you could drop a clue about the information plot, and you could develop something in the Steal the MacGuffin plot, like maybe they're investigating someone. You could do all of that in one scene. So all of these little moments that I have, these specific moments, get smushed together. Not only does it simplify things, but it also gives you scenes that accomplish multiple goals at the same time, which is what we want. Yes, okay. Tip number 3 that I always think it's important to remember, that for me, that really helps me, is using software that gives both a macro and a micro view. So I know some people use Scrivener, which uses scene cards, so you can kind of see them laid out, and then you can see them in more detail. I like to use Notion, and they have a toggle feature, so you can kind of see all of the scenes listed down, and then click for more detail, and it kind of just like drops down like that. I find that very, very useful because, yeah, I need to be able to see the big picture as well as dive in deeper and see the details. And as I go through, multiple passes over this outline, I'm going to add more and more detail to all of the scenes. I find if I use something like Microsoft Word, a very important scene might have like a page of text about it with like snippets of dialogue that I think should be in it. And then it makes it very hard to view the overall arc of the story because you have all of this information about the scene. So being able to hide that and just see the macro is super important for me. Tip number 4 is all about story structure, and is reminding myself that I can turn to story structure at any point in this process. Once I feel like I have an outline, I do like to go over and superimpose structures on my outline to help me see where the holes are. So I'll go through, and usually I have something in an idea of like, okay, that was the refusal of the call. This is when they're crossing the threshold. There's the fun and games, yada, 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 just making sure that all of those things are there. And sometimes you can say, oh, I don't have this. Do I want to add in this beat or not? There's a difference, I think, between saying, here's a beat and I'm going to brainstorm ways to make that beat happen, and here's my plot and I'm going to see if I have this beat in my plot. In the second one, you're risking actually not having a beat because you've superimposed it in there and you're seeing something that's not there. However, for me, I find that when I do the threading and then the putting together, it helps me create a better story, I suppose, and a story that makes more sense and is more cause and effect versus saying, okay, I need this beat, this beat, this beat, because you can have all the beats and still not have your cause and effect there and still not have the overarching story, the overarching goals that you need to accomplish, all of the threads laid out, if that makes sense. So just starting from structure, like Save the Cat, I find is not enough detail. There's not enough meat there for my story to really feel vibrant and alive. Whereas if I do the cause and effect, the what is logical, what needs to happen first, and then I bring in story structure, it tends to work better for me. Be interested to hear what you do, where you bring story structure in, and if you do it all. And finally, tip number 5 is that this process is not rigid. I used to think that I had to outline the entire novel before I could start writing anything. That is actually really bad advice. If you're writing and you're outlining and you have a scene come to you and you're really excited to write it, not write it. Write it right then. You don't have to wait. You can just go. And if, you know what, writing when you're excited about writing, I think is always a good idea. Write what you're excited about right then, because you might not be so excited about it later. For this novel, I had been working on sort of my story work, and then I realized that without even trying to outline, I knew exactly what would happen in the first act of the novel. It ended up being the first 15,000 words. I was like, I know it. Do I have to outline the rest of the book? And I was like, no. So I just wrote the first 15,000 words, and now I'm coming back and I'm outlining the rest of the book. I think I probably will do a rough outline of the rest of it because everything from this point on really depends on the end. So the end is going to dictate everything that they do through the rest of the act because it's a heist, so they have to put things into place and plan for certain things and information plots, etc. But I definitely will follow my own advice and my own tip of when there is a scene I really want or I'm really excited to go to a scene I'm really excited to edit, I can go in and do that. Plan right, plan right. Story Genius talks about this a little bit, how they recommend doing a hybrid of plotting and pantsing. And I think it's a really good idea. Why not? This process is not rigid. Even if something that you did for the last book worked really well, it might not work for this book. It might not work for this draft. So you can always work on what you're excited about first and where you feel the attention is needed. Okay, so those are my 5 tips for outlining a novel in Preptober. Let me know what you're working on this NaNoWriMo. Let me know if you have any other tips for outlining. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.